Guys, okay, this is really exciting for me. I might smile the entire time because some of my favorite people are up here. Brad, Sammy. You guys don't, a lot of you don't know Christian Gonzalez, but you do wish that you did know Christian Gonzalez. But he has, honestly, I can't wait for him to grab this mic. And if you want to keep it the whole time, you can. Like, we won't be mad. But yeah, I'm glad he's here. Glad he's living in the area. Glad I'm living in the area. But yeah, let's get this started. Brad's gonna kick us off.
Yeah, Brad.
As only Brad can.
Oh my goodness. 8 days.
I am, guys, I'm getting married in 8 days. Shout out Victoria Janelle, soon to be Lachapell. Man, well, I feel like tonight was a win. How do you guys feel like that already? Honestly, I feel like everything else is just icing on the cake. What I wanted to pick up is where the documentary left off. And it was a moment that I had, a revelation that I had, just a little bit of my story. In 2014, I was very unaware and unengaged with matters of race in America. And my family was living in the St. Louis area at the time, in a suburb of St. Louis, and a shooting in Ferguson happened. And a young man named Michael Brown was shot and killed by a police officer. And there was just unrest that was happening in St. Louis. And I said to myself, I don't understand what's going on, but I want to. And honestly, there was so much controversy. I'm just going to jump right into it. There was so much controversy around what happened in the moment. Why he was shot. And I said, to me it doesn't matter who is in the right and who is in the wrong. I'm sure at times the officer was in the wrong. I'm sure there were moments where Michael Brown was in the wrong. But what matters to me is that it revealed a ton of pain in the hearts of people. And though I don't understand right now, but I want to understand. Does that make sense? And so I began to wake up to the reality of racism in America in my immediate context. Some of my favorite moments were the conversations that we had on our team. And so we're listening to one another on our team. And John asked this question, what does it look like to carry one another's burdens like Christ? Like Jesus, what does it look like to carry one another's burdens? And so we had time, we had like 24 hours before we were having a conversation. And I remember the Lord struck me with one of the phrases you heard, that to carry one another's burdens is not just to carry someone's pain, but to also carry their potential. You can't cast vision for a greater reality without knowing where we are right now. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I can't have a dream if I don't know what's happening right now. I told the Bryans today that I have such empathy for the white community because I think so many people are really leaning in and they're like, man, I will do anything. Just tell me what to do. I will do anything. And I think there is a side of it that wants a quick solution. There's a part of us that want a quick solution. That's not right, because it's gonna be a process. So the one thing and the top thing that I would call the white community to is really commit to friendship with people of color and people who don't look like you, and really, even more than that, really commit to a friendship that carries one another's pain and carries their potential. And as much as I'm going to invest in my calling and my life and the things that God has said about my life, that I believe I'm going to invest as much, if not more, into your life, John, you know? And it's for the black community as a whole, but I really want to challenge you. Are there people, you don't have to force it to happen, you know, like, you don't have to say like, oh, you're my black friend. You know, I mentioned it in the video, like, you're my black friend. I'm going to force it to happen. That's uncomfortable, that's awkward. But I think there's ways you can be intentional to really commit yourself. And it's almost like a covenant friendship with someone who comes from a different ethnic background than you. But I was in a moment where I was really, I had heard a conversation on race. I was watching it online, and I was just a little discontent. I was like, man, God, there's got to be more. there's got to be more to this. There's got to be more that you're asking of us, God. And I felt God saying, it's a love that covers a multitude of sins. It's a love that covers a multitude of sins. And I think friendship can be defined by so many things. But what I want to call people to is a friendship that commits to a love that will cover a multitude of sins that has been committed against the Black community in America and people of color in America. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so for every moment that you've experienced racism, I'm going to make sure you experience 10 times more the amount of love. And for every moment you felt misunderstood, I'm going to make sure 10 times over you feel understood.
Yeah.
And for every moment you've been in an environment and in a system that steals life from you and that isn't set up for you to flourish, I'm going to create an atmosphere and an environment for you to flourish and you to thrive and you to become fully who you're created to be. It's a love that covers for generations, right? And I keep saying this is the last thing I'll say, but where we are is because of malintent and racism that has happened over hundreds of years, right? Thousands of years. And I want to have a love that is that committed and more to dismantle systems of racism that have been built up. As much intention, as much action, as much energy that's been put in to destroying other people, I'm going to commit that much more to love. And what I made a covenant with the Lord. I'm committing for a lifetime. I believe things can happen in moments, like George was saying, but I'm committed for the long haul, and I'm committed for a lifetime. I'm committed to the dream, you know, and I want to call all of us. Would we commit to a love that covers the multitude of sins that's been committed for years and years and years, and in moments, to people of color? And would I commit to a love that would cover that?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's the panel. I just have a thought, and any of you have one, and then we'll answer any questions. How many of us think we have any level of faith in the room for anything? Any like hope, optimism, anything? Just a little bit. Shout out to my friend Emily. She's not here, but she was one of the main voices and videographers and directors on this project. She couldn't make it tonight, but there's one thing that I want to say that she said to me about a week ago, and it was, she said, optimism only gains its power when it's grounded in reality. And so you can't move forward and like go after these big visions, these big dreams that we're talking about, and any other one, if you're not first grounded in like the truth and like the facts and like what's actually happening in like real stories. And so I would even make that a challenge to you have a challenge, I have one as well. To this room is like, because I know us to be an optimistic people and like ready just to go for anything. But I feel like to really like give birth to real solutions, which what we're really after. We have to first ground ourselves in like the pain and the truth of the situation, and that'll drive our optimism, our faith.
I have to shout out Dr. Julie. Is it Dr. Julie? Is that the right professor at, is it Penn State? Is that right? She's here. But she said a quote to me, so I'm kind of stealing it, but I'm giving her credit, all the credit. Remind me if this is right. She said, waking is a process. Is that right? When she said that to me this morning, waking is a process, I think there's, stay woke and like really understanding, I'm a woke person. But when she said, she goes, no, waking is a process and it happens and we never come to a place of arrival. Wow. And we're always more and more leaning in. And so I was inspired this morning just listening to that. But I was thinking, here's what I was thinking, I'll give it to Christian or any of the ladies here, is I hope this affects each of us personally. Yeah. That's what I hope. Because I was so affected through that video, it's the first time seeing it, that there was a lady that had experienced the church bombing. Like she was actually alive at that time. And I was thinking about, man, that wasn't that long ago. Like it wasn't. And I think a lot of times it's easy, depending on where you grew up, your demographic, your race, and specifically when we talk about white privilege, it's easy to be like, well, is that real? Is that not? Well, it totally is real, one. So if you don't think it is, we'll talk later. But second, I just think of like, man, could this affect us more than just a circuit rider season? If we got this in our heart, this would change us forever. And I was thinking about the quote of MLK. He says, in the end of the day, you're not going to remember the words from your enemies, but the silence from your friends. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, dang, man. Like, and so a way to truly speak is first to listen. And so my encouragement for all of us, myself primarily first, and then all of us in this room is, can we take this next year, and the goal is to listen as much as we can. And specifically on the topic of race, and specifically in the context of African Americans. Does that make sense? So all race, but can we specifically focus in the place of African Americans? Because here's the thing is that we all want to be heard, and that's human nature, but not all of us have the ability to go into any room to be heard, but all of us have the ability to go into any room and listen. And I just feel like what if we took a year to be like, my goal is to listen this year. And when someone asks me, I'll share, but I want to listen. How that would, I guarantee you, will be our most fun year, and our discovery of people we would have is unheard. Last thing I'll say, give it to Christian, because I need to at least hear him say something. Please. Biblically, I'm thinking of John chapter 4, one of my favorite scriptures, but how Jesus asked questions and opened up that woman's heart. And really, it's easy to be seen, and we hate not being seen, and the worst thing we hate is being seen wrongly. But through questions, Jesus opened up just her life, and really, she was the key to that whole city. And so how that could be so true, where people disregard certain people, that through questions and through listening, it could change everything. So that's what I was inspired by, and I'm always inspired by John and the whole team. And I'm just so grateful. It's such a bold, courageous move. And I just want to say, as circuit riders, we're behind you, John. And
I hate talking about race, actually. My wife created a context in which those conversations could happen. So we're talking about, and she's asking, like, how are you feeling about, like, X, Y, and Z? Like, and it can't just happen with anybody, right? You can't just walk up to the next person of color and be like, hey, I'm learning about racism, and I really want to talk to you. Like, no, don't do that. Don't do that to me, right? Like, there's a level of relationship, and as you look at Jesus, he doesn't just have conversations with the woman who's caught in the act of adultery and be like, hey, let's talk about that right now while everybody's standing there. He actually removes everybody from the scene. Or he goes and finds the woman at the well, and he doesn't confront her or talk to her when everybody's around.
That's right.
Nicodemus comes to him at night, and doesn't bring Nicodemus over to the rest of the disciples, like, hey, let's have a public conversation about, you as an official who want to talk to me about, my godship. These have to occur in the context of relationship, but they also need to occur slowly. So the problem is that most of what our culture does is talk. So even though our default is to talk. Most of you probably have Facebook and Instagram, and so those are mechanisms of speaking all the time. And you're always, just think about yourself, I can say this from experience, you're always thinking about, how do I Instagram this? How do I, make this public? How do I acquire likes on my account? So we are always by default trying to speak. And it looks very different. So going back to the couch, it looks very different when what is the context and what is the format in which slow conversation happens? Not just conversation that makes you feel good or that allows you to say like, oh, I'm having conversations, but that really strips you of the ability to talk, not because you don't want to talk, but listening is so rare. I don't think we realize how rare it is to listen. There's no platform out there to get you to listen. There's a lot of platforms that get us to talk, but there's none to get us to listen. And so that happens through the slow process of unplugging yourself and really taking time with people, taking time with the world around you, and slowing down. And you need to really go and engage with the Father about what does that look like, because these conversations can't just happen ad hoc. They really have to be intentional, but they have to be meaningful. And if they're going to be meaningful, then they're going to have to be created in very quiet contexts. Context in which you can hear your own heart, you can hear the heart of someone else. And those are rare. That's a rare condition in our day and age.
Wow. So good.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That was on. Hey. Hi, friends. Yes. Okay. So yeah, I love the couch. I'm a big fan of the couch. I want to speak on just like the topic of ignorance. And like, I spent my whole life just kind of being ignorant to what other people felt when it came to racism in America. And I think for me, I felt a lot of just like, I guess I could use the term discrimination within my own family, within African American community. So I didn't ever like see someone else's pain. I was just always focused on my own. And so like whenever I came into college, when I went through college or whatever, but then like my last year, something just like hit me. And I don't know, it's just like my eyes opened up to like, oh my gosh, like what do I believe like when it comes to racism in America, like, and I found myself like always on like Facebook and social media and like picking up what other people's opinions, what other people thought. And I was just like, well, like, actually, let me stop and think, like, have I ever, like, thought for myself, like, what does this look like? What does this mean? What are people feeling? Have I ever listened to someone's story, really, before? Also, one thing that was going on in my mind is my dad's a police officer. So I'm like, whoa, like, I haven't even thought of that whole thing before, like, any of these, like, just different things that fall upon, like, just who I am. And so, yeah, I just want to encourage you all just to not be ignorant and not choose to walk in ignorance, because a lot of the times I hear people like use the term of like, oh, they're just like ignorant to the situation, and it's just like, we can only be ignorant for so long. That person can only be ignorant for so long. And if your eyes have been open to a situation, if someone's tried to like sit there and tell you what they feel and how they feel like hurt from someone trying to see them as some type of way or whatever, and you still choose to not listen, that's you choosing to be ignorant. And so I think it's just like encourage you to not walk in that ignorance any longer. And recently, I just had situations where I was just like sharing with some people, like, this is what I feel when someone sees me this way, someone tries to like say that I talk this way, or just because I'm black, And it's just like having everyone in the room not try to listen and understand where I'm coming from. And I'm like, whoa, this like hurts. Just to have people that say they do carry the heart of Jesus, but say they carry the heart of Jesus, but then like look over this whole topic. So I just want to encourage you not to take this moment, like George was just saying, like to just like let these moments pass you by, but like grab a hold of this and like say, okay, what can I take from this? And yeah, just how do I move forward as like a follower of Christ and just getting his heart. But
I just to kind of speak on a little bit of what Ty mentioned. I was actually having a conversation with Krista, and she said something that I thought, it just struck me because it's reality, but like, anyways, she says reconciliation is the message of the gospel, and it's so true. Like, what Christ came to do is to reconcile us back to the Father, and it's like, that's like the gospel, that's it. And so it's like, once we're reconciled to him, a component of that is us being reconciled to one another. Yeah. Brian talks about it a lot. He talks about unity and agreement. And it's just like, there's no way that we can fully fulfill what it is that God has for each one of us without one another. And so what does that mean? Yes, you might not be at the forefront of racial reconciliation or racial justice, but that doesn't mean that you don't have a seat at the table. And that doesn't mean that I don't need your voice, we don't need your voice in these issues in different situations. There are rooms that you can walk into and your voice will be heard at a magnitude that I would walk into and people wouldn't listen to me. There are people who identify with you in ways that I don't identify with them. And when you speak to them, they're more receptive just because of that connection that they have with you. Maybe I'll get to share later on, I'm not sure, but I was writing this piece and at the end of it, I said, who are we to determine the standard of justice when we serve a God who sits on a throne made of it? And it hit me like a ton of bricks, because for us, sometimes we will look, at a Mike Brown case and say, this is right, this is wrong, this is black, this is white. But that's not the issue. The issue is not who's right, who's wrong. The issue is both ends, both parties, right, are at equal distance when it comes to knowing who God is, and who am I to deem that one person deserves it more than the other. And so I would really just charge this room that, like, any sphere that you walk into, any opportunity that you have to be a voice for someone who doesn't have one, like, why not take it? That's a privilege. Like, God is grafting you into the story, and why forfeit, where he might be giving you authority to really be a light. And so I would just challenge us with that as we do go on tour and as we do walk on these campuses, not necessarily to, like, hungrily chase situations to talk to the black person or to the Hispanic person or whatever the case may be, but to really say, when the opportunity does present itself, I make myself available to have these conversations, because I really don't know what God could do, like George said, through moments. So.
I just want to tag off of that, like, I don't know where everybody's at, and, like, I mean, the discourse in our country is such that you'd have to be living under a rock to not know what's going on. But, so, I think sometimes there's the idea that we should all just, like, get along, and eventually when this gets figured out, we'll all get along, and we'll go back to looking like the body of Christ, and, like, because God doesn't see color and, like, stuff like that, but, like, if you read Revelations, every tribe and tongue and nation enters a kingdom. So what that means is, so the end of all things is a wedding, right? Now you wouldn't, well, you're getting married, right? Would you go on with your wedding if your fiance doesn't show up? Right, so if every tribe and tongue and nation is going to show up, right, if there's one not there, then there's not going to be a wedding, right? So the problem isn't that, we just need to, like, sing around the tree and all hold hands so that God will, like, bring us into heaven, because he just wants us to, like, get along. And then when we go to heaven, like, I'm not going to be brown anymore, we'll all be white, Yeah, I always see through, right? Yeah. No, like, we're going to retain all of our individuality. Not only that, we're going to retain our culture. And so what it looks like is, we can talk about revival all we want. It's just a concept that we've really been drawing. I won't go into the history about it, but we're really drawing it from, like, various different ideas that are or aren't biblical. But the fact is, in Revelation, is that if there are peoples and cultures that aren't being represented and aren't informing how I relate to the Lord, because right now, most of your theology is dominated by an Enlightenment, Western European epistemology. So that's problematic. That's very problematic. And the fact that we are not equally informed by other cultures means that you will never see God, those dimensions of the Father.
Yeah.
So it's not that, like, we just, I need to go to Bethel or IHOP or whatever, YWAM. It's that, like, it is an institutionalized, spirituality that you need to be a part of. It's that if you don't have the voice of your brother and sister and their culture, it's not just like you happen to be black or you happen to be, brown or Hispanic, but, I'll look past that. You have, like, a very interesting way you worship, like, all these different things. Like, they're so excited, like, they're so, like, theologically, intellectual. All these different things actually have to, like, come together, and not like a salad with too much dressing. You have to, like, taste it. Because I think a lot of times when we talk about, and that's why I don't like necessarily to say reconciliation, because there was never a time when, like, black and brown people were thought of like, oh, you're okay, like, no, that's not how we came over to America. So it's not about reconciliation. We're not going back to anything. we're actually trying to discover something that has never been.
Yeah.
You know? So
good.
no one knows what that looks like.
Yeah.
And what that will eventually look like in its fullness will be walking into the kingdom and seeing everybody represented in their fullness and in the fullness of their culture as it ought to be. So we're not just doing this as some preliminary thing so we can get back to the way things were and be like, oh, now we can all go to heaven together. It's actually like, most of us don't know God because we've only seen one very limited version of it, which has come out of Western Europe.
Wow.
And so we ought not to be hungry just for the sake of justice in an abstract sense, because that's the only one we're reconciling with is God. You know,
Yeah.
there's never been a time of world peace, so we can't talk about reconciliation among peoples. But we can seek for conciliation amongst each other.
So good.
So good.
Before we have questions, I just want to know what you're hearing.
She was like, these conversations, like it's good to have these conversations where you're listening to us, but like it needs to be had among like the white community. The white community needs to be talking about these things and actually like having these conversations where like we are talking about the things that we need to be reconciling with, or not reconciling, but reconciling with the black community, and saying like, am I going to listen, or even in ourselves, like, are we going to stay in ignorance, or are we going to actually like sit down and listen to the voices that are being heard? And so that was just so powerful to me, because she was like your voice is so much more powerful than mine in your community, because like they're going to listen to you, but they might not listen to me. And so I think it's so important that we're being in that place of learning, because our voice is pretty powerful, like to our community, where sometimes people won't listen, you know. And so that was just like something that like struck me when she was like, yeah, because
Just the biggest takeaway I'm getting from all of this is just the, like Ashley said, the listening part. And even as an African American, like I think it's just as important to listen. Even in conversation with people who look like me, how can I help my own people? Like just have an open heart, or have an open ear or eyes to like the bigger picture of what needs to happen to society. But yeah, it's really important to listen. Like no matter where you're from, inner city, suburb, black, white, just listen. Because it's gonna make sense.
So good.
What I heard was what George said. He said people are addicted to the way things have been.
Yeah.
And I think like people are addicted to the way that it's been in their mind.
Wow.
Like I read this
So
book called
good.
Screwtape Letters, and it said that our worst enemy is the familiar, because it causes us to not care about the unfamiliar.
Yeah.
Obviously, like God is unfamiliar to us, and that's our goal, is to know God more. Like that's why Jesus died on the cross, to know Him more. And I just think like what I'm seeing from this is like it's so biblical that we as people like not even just race, but especially in this moment, race, right? To claim to be blind so that we're actually enabled to see. Because if you think you see, you have your ears closed and your eyes closed. But if you say, I am blind, then God pushes out that grace so that we can actually understand and can perceive what's actually happening.
Yeah.
You know, so claiming that we are unfamiliar so that we can become familiar with more of God's heart.
That's good.
And one of the main things that I'm hearing is, I just love what Christian said. The point that he made, I think, is so important, that we haven't seen that perfect reconciliation or conciliation yet. I think that that's so important, because I think we all look at this room and we look at what's happening and we're so filled with hope. Because even this morning, being with the Bryans as well, I was so struck by just the fact that our generation has an opportunity, and I think that that's the beauty of all of this and what you guys have pioneered, is we have an opportunity to create a reality that the world hasn't seen yet in God. And that is what's so inspiring about this room. Like, all of us are creatives in some way, and just the thought that we get to create a reality. We get to see Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream fulfilled, where he himself didn't even get to see it. To me, that's what's so moving about this, and I think that's the lens even of speaking of the difference between a justice movement that doesn't know Jesus and one that does, is that we get to actually have the hope of a new reality that the Lord would usher in. So that's just my overwhelming feeling in all of this is like, man, because it gets discouraging. It totally, when you're looking at darkness and when you're looking at pain, it gets so discouraging. But I'm just so honestly filled with hope today of the game changers who are in this room, the people who are hearing this message and what's stirring in hearts across this room and what God's going to do out of that. So good.
As long as we have to be willing to listen and to humble ourselves in any of our preconceived notions that we may have had, and be willing to listen and carry each other's burdens by putting ourselves in that pain that's been felt, so we can see the fulfillment of the Great Commission and that we can be with Jesus. But I love what you said, Christian, that it's a wedding, and you wouldn't go if one person isn't there, and I don't want to go. Yeah. And I think that has to be the mindset is I don't want to go, not I can't go, I won't go if we're not all in it together. So I love this. This is my first experience having this conversation, at 21 and then now, and I think it's been one of the most beautiful and mind-opening conversations that I get to be a part of. So I'm saying I won't go unless we get to go together. So yeah.
One thing I'm hearing kind of as an undertone from what you're saying, and having experiences growing up in a small mountain town in North Georgia, there's a way to listen where I'm listening because I want to feel better about myself, or I'm listening to someone of color with a preconceived notion of what their experience is, and I'm trying to help them. Or there's a way of listening, like what Timmy was saying, that was so good, where I'm lowering myself to not coming to listen to you with any preconceived notion of what your experience already is, or to like save you or save your situation or your race in some way, but saying that in you is something that I need, and you've experienced something that I have not experienced that I want, and that I'm not complete without, and that's why I'm listening. So I've been just hearing you guys, that's just like hitting me in this moment, like, man, sometimes even I listen kind of with a savior complex, I just don't want that to be part of my listening.
So I'm a doer. I love to do. Like, if you give me something to do, I would do it really well, and you'll be very happy, I promise. That's my natural inclination. I just want to do. If I see a problem, Google, we'll fix it. It's just like a huge component of scripture is listening. And I know from experience in my life is that if I'm sitting down with someone and they're saying, this is what's happening, you can ask any of my friends. I will ask you questions to the death. Why? Because it's not necessarily, like, I feel that there's just such a grace for people to get to solution when they start speaking it out themselves. And so it's just like, if you're saying, what more can we do? Like, one of the most powerful things is to listen, because from listening, you will find more things to do. Does that make sense? And so not to negate action, because we do need to act, but listening itself is active. It's not passive. And so in response to that, I would say, yes, there are things that you can do. One, which is something that I think you said that you're doing, is educating yourself, right? So you're listening, you're diversifying, the voices that are, that you're listening to. So that is a great step, because there might be a quote you hear and you'd be like, yeah, I was listening to this, and that sparks conversation. So you're doing, essentially, but it may not be, I'm standing on the forefront of this protest with this picket sign with people that you get what I'm saying? So it might not necessarily be in the way that we process doing.
My simple thought is that sometimes when we go into, what can I do? And I know this isn't what you're saying. I'm just going beyond it, and just, because I think sometimes we leave these moments, if you're white, and you go, okay, I'm ready to fix the problem, right? And it goes into fix it mode as opposed to back to listen mode, you know what I mean? And so I think the most important thing here is that, could it be maybe it's us that need to be fixed, right? In our mindset and the way we think. Yes. And if we get involved intentionally, then our mindset actually, we're the ones that are getting fixed, as opposed to us coming and fixing others. Like, I got the answer, here it is, let's do this, It's housing, it's, matriarchal system, it's boom, 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 and we can name all the stuff, but if we haven't walked in the shoes, then we don't understand the context of what someone's carrying. And so I think the way to become a William Wilberforce is to intentionally get involved in the lives that not that you're even desiring to reach, it's the ones that you're desiring to do life with. Does that make sense? For us in this room, like, to be that one Wilberforce is to lean in, intentionally pray, but also just to intentionally do life with each other. And as we do that, I feel like it's going to lead to trust. And I think really the last thing is like not rushing. I like what Christian was saying about quiet place, talking about conciliation. But I also think it's like sometimes we're like, all right, racism, let's just be done with it. Let's go. You know, and like we want to be so fast, but we want to be fast with something we didn't experience. And so I think our area of being a Wilberforce is really to be like, I'm willing to go the distance as long as it takes. Let's do it together. Does that make sense?
And I realized something personally. Particularly some of the black students at 21 were feeling on the margins, feeling like they people were lacking intentionality and actually giving preference toward other people, which is true. And so we had a conversation with the whole school. It was so powerful. And we just heard the stories of 5 black women who had experienced racism throughout their lives, and also just the things that they were experiencing in the school, in the immediate context. And what I realized in that moment, there's so much power and so much healing that comes in being heard. And it confounded me. I was like, we didn't change necessarily the systems of injustice that had caused pain throughout those five women's lives. But I was convinced that was probably the most, if not one of the most healing moments that happened in these 5 women's lives. And I think, to echo, I don't know if Sammy said it or I think Sade said it, but for me, hearing someone's story is provoking. And I love the couch because every time we come back to listen and hear someone on the couch, it provokes me in a new way and activates me in a new way that I couldn't have gotten if I would have just sat and said, okay, what's the strategy? I obviously God could download a strategy, but God would speak in a moment when I would hear someone.
So
Troy, what you could do, is going back into the crew and the people that you influence in your own culture, and as these moments come up, say, actually, it's not like that. And moments where you could speak in and help change that and invite them, like, I used to think this way, but really, it's this way. And then it helps change moments, even in people that you're surrounded with. Maybe it's your family, maybe whatever like group that you're involved with. Does that make sense?
I'm just going to say, I think, just to speak on the idea of listening, because I think it's so key and everybody says it. So the danger right now is that it's a trope. Like, I mean, we've heard this, 100 times, or 100,000 times probably. So how does it not be a trope? There are some systemic things that happen, right? So let's say, let's all listen to colored people, right? Like, and you start having more conversations. That's awesome, but at the end of the day, when it's time to like put somebody up to speak at church, who's going to go up there? That's right. So it's not just me listening, in that context. It's also me saying, it's also you thinking structurally. That's right. What are the structures that you're a part of? Who gets to speak? Who gets to sing? Who gets to be in front of everybody? Who should be in front of everybody? Like, I mean, I'll talk from like my perspective. Like, my dad is very Latino and black, so when he starts talking, his Latino-ness comes out, and he starts telling mad long stories, right? So I'm just like, oh, Dad, please get to the point. These white people do not want to hear another story. And so, but at the same time, as I've grown older, I realized like, there's like embedded wisdom. And yes, I study like tons of philosophy, so I can articulate to you why a story is embedded with intelligence that isn't resident in like a Western enlightened form of thought. But sometimes you just need to like step back and then secondly, I think you have a clear indication of this in the current Me Too movement, right? So you have Harvey Weinstein, who was a huge proponent of ostensibly on the surface he was a proponent of women's rights, right? And you have many different journalists and different people, and they were saying all the right things, they were doing all the right things, like in their own minds and to other people, but at the end of the day, we find out that they were horrific. They were horrific monsters because nothing was changing in here. Now, we can talk about racism is a sin, but what happens is really about whether you believe you're an orphan or a son or a daughter, right? So that's the fruit of something much deeper. So as much as I'm listening, we also need to be asking the Holy Spirit, like, what is going on in my heart that I respond like this? Not like, let me stop being a racist, because that's what everybody else wants to see. That's what the world wants you to stop being racist. They don't care if you're a son or I'm a daughter of God. They don't care, right? But that actually makes all the difference in the world, because you will stop being a racist as soon as you understand yourself to no longer be an orphan, right? I'm not saying not to structurally address racism, because I write and I talk all about this. But at the same time, you cannot say you're listening if all you're doing is trying to address the outward effects, because within our hearts is where, like, it says in Psalm 37, I will be still and wait upon the Lord. Now that word wait actually means to, it actually, in the Hebrew, it actually means to give birth, prepare to give birth. So there's a kind of waiting where you're just sitting there and like waiting and listening to somebody. And then there's a different kind of waiting where it's you're giving birth to something new in God, in yourself. And you can be positioned to do that. I doubt any woman who is about to give birth to a baby is just chilling, wherever, and just like, let this baby come. She's like ready to give birth. And that is, you have to believe that God is wanting to speak to not just the racist actions, thoughts, etc. that men will judge, but the depths of your heart, right? Christ says, if you look at a woman, like forget about like touching her or having adultery, if you look at her lustfully, you've committed sin in your heart. If you've spoken this thing about your brother, you've committed murder. So it's that the racist stuff that our society is concerned with, that's just like the bare minimum. Like if you want to live according to the law, like go ahead, but that's not the narrow way of Christ. The narrow way of Christ means that as we listen, if we truly are listening, there's going to be a lot of parts in us that are going to have to be crucified, because all of you know, like, oh, I shouldn't say this and I shouldn't think that. Like, we can all be very polite racists, in the room. Wow. And that's what's going on in the rest of our society. But will we all, myself included, will we allow ourselves and the old man to be crucified? And that stuff will go away pretty quickly.
There's like a few lengthy talks about whether like white privilege is real or not, and a recurring argument that I hear is that like the statistics just don't show it, you know what I mean? And it's like people will come to them with like anecdotes of like stories of racism that have happened in their personal life. So I guess I just want to pick apart like why the anecdotes and like why the personal stories are like really important. Like regardless of whether like whatever like the statistics show, like why are anecdotes like just as if not more important than like the statistics and like the numbers and the graphs?
If you, what's your name?
Sage.
Sage. Okay, so I don't know who you are, and if I ask you any information about yourself, right? Let's say we're at a party or at this event, right? And I start to ask you, not on the mic, but like, tell me about yourself, where you're from. You're gonna tell me a whole bunch of things, right? And that's just a bunch of stories. Now I have no idea, but like all of us will like say hello, what's up, and you'll tell me your story. I'll believe you for the rest of your life, right? I'm not sitting there thinking like, wow, I bet he's an axe murderer. Like, so the fact is that each individual human being is nothing but a story. Now that's very terrifying, but it's also very liberating. So, like I'll be technical. You can look all this up, like look up all the big words I use right now, but I can't think in any other way quickly. So because we live in a technocratic society that's obsessed with data, right? And because we grew up in an Enlightenment-dominated system of thought, everybody, and a scientific way of and science is a story. It's not that I don't believe in science, but science is a storytelling mechanism, as is math. It's not. The world isn't made of math. We just devised math as a way of explaining the universe, right? And it does a pretty good job, but it's definitely not what's out there. So we've come to believe that if you give me facts and figures, it's true. It's quote unquote true. And if you give me stories, oh, that's so subjective, I don't really know whether or not I want to believe in that, but like, wake up. Everything you're believing, whether it's a number or a story, is a story. Whether it's explicitly a story or it's implicitly a story.
Wow.
Dang. So then the differentiation comes in that, like, are you willing to listen to somebody else's story? Or are you going to delude yourself into continuing to believe that facts and figures are the only way in which a true story can be told? And we all know in the room that facts and figures can be manipulated in any number of ways to tell any kind of story you want to tell. That's the kind of condition we live in today, which no one knows what to trust anymore. And so we, in our society, we are tasked with something that's quite interesting, but goes back to the Greeks and before that, but like, how do you know you're not in a dream, right? Yeah, most of us don't. I mean, you look at Facebook and like, you can't even tell me where you're from and be absolutely certain of it. And you're gonna show me your birth certificate and I'll be like, do you remember that? You know? Just believe a bunch of stories your parents told you. You know? So we are always, this is important to me because you must read the stories of Malcolm X, you must read the stories of Ta-Nehisi Coates, like, you must read these stories, and they don't have to be Christian stories to be true.
That's right.
Right? We must read the stories of those around us and allow them to affect us. And the people who say like, oh, or trying to, I mean, I barely even want to like address the idea that there's not white privilege, but if you're trying to argue that, what is the story that you want to believe about the world? You know, but let's not get into arguments with people. Let's avoid that condition, and let's try to move in the way of Christ, in which he like waited in front of the person, and Jesus was always, he didn't respond to immediate questions because he would always respond to the question that was in the person's heart. And the story, the backstory, right? So the woman at the well is drilling him with like really intense theological questions. He's responding to the story behind those questions. So when somebody comes up to me and starts, you know, all kinds of garbage about like, whatever, it's not true, like, you know, whatever, black people have it great right now. You're gonna need the Holy Spirit, you know, to say like, okay, I'm not getting mad. I mean, I will get mad if it's not wrong, but let me not destroy this person right now. And let me, Holy Spirit, what is this person's story? Like, what is it that you want to speak to right now? Because I could speak to a lot of different things, and like, you know, with my background, I could totally destroy this person like in an intellectual argument, and I could present him with all kinds of facts, figures, stories, etc. that they'd walk away and be, you know, they would still believe what they want to believe. You are never going to transform that person's heart because you haven't affected their story that's running in your head.
Wow.
Whatever story runs in your head is the one you believe, and that's how you create your identity. So let's not just seek to like flip answers and come up with more stats. Educate yourself so that you, in your story, are not regurgitating ideas that you don't really believe anyway. The only way that somebody talking about white privilege not being true is threatening is if you actually don't believe it's true. And if I don't believe it's true, then I actually need to like do more research and listen and like hear my own heart out. I don't need to convince anyone.
Reverse racism. So in a lot of the just conversations I would have with white adults or white friends, they would just be like, well, I've been treated poorly by the black community, or just like, oh, I was in the grocery store and the black women in there didn't treat me, like whatever the story was, like of reverse racism. So I just wanted to hear from you guys, what is your response to this idea of reverse racism?
So I think every person, no matter what the color of your skin, is capable of bias. right, is capable of preferring someone more than another. But when someone would say that they've experienced reverse racism, I think a lot of it is, it's not reverse racism. I think a lot of times it is a mistrust and a need to earn trust, if that makes sense. So I think I'll tell you a story. I moved into a neighborhood in St. Louis for a couple of summers, and it was a predominantly black community, and I wanted to help, and I was just receiving some mistrust, and I was wrestling through that feeling of like, man, I'm here to help, I'm here to listen, and I had a realization that I had to earn trust. I really did have to earn trust, and maybe I had to lean in and understand maybe I wasn't being treated the way that I expected to be treated or want to be treated, because this might have been, their history of their experience with the white community has been a negative one. Yeah. And I have to be willing to lay my life down, and to really earn trust in the black community. And so I wouldn't call it reverse racism all the time. Maybe you guys, obviously free to agree and disagree. But I would say there's an opportunity to really press past it and really earn trust. And understand, again,
in simple terms, it's a long conversation, but I think we just look at the history, you know what I mean? Yeah. Look at the history of it. And so even a Christian, how do we get here? Minorities, specifically African Americans and Latinos, how do you get to America? So when you talk about the issue of slavery and race, like when you say I've experienced the same, it's it's an ignorant and it's like comment to me. Yeah. When you're like, oh, I've experienced the same, you're like, whoa, hang on. You're saying your one moment and this moment is the same as hundreds of years of history of pain. That's what you're saying. Okay, you are saying that, but you say you aren't. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's about getting under it, and usually people who say that are trying to avoid the whole conversation. Exactly. And so instead of trying to avoid it, you just say, listen, I always ask people, you're saying that's the same? Then they'll usually, if they're honest, no, it's not. Okay, don't avoid it. Just run straight into like really wanting to learn and change. Yeah, that's good.
I would want to drop my defensiveness, and I think there's a quickness in us to want to defend ourselves as a white person, to demonstrate to people, and I think that's what I was doing a lot of times, not knowing it, to demonstrate to people that I'm not racist, I'm not what you've experienced before, but I think we have to remove the accusation that we would feel. We have to remove the defensiveness that we would feel. And there's a fear of saying the wrong thing and doing the wrong thing that keeps us from engaging. Yeah. It paralyzes us. We're like, I don't want to be the racist white person. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to do the wrong thing, so I don't do anything at all. And so that's how I would encourage the person as well, is to push past that.
I was just going to say really quickly, I think even on a more practical level, if I'm engaged in conversation with someone and that's the response they were to give, I would just simply ask, okay, and how did you feel? And so it's just like, if you felt that, what do you think of someone who experiences that every day?
That's right.
And so I think something that I learned is two things people really hate: when you question their character and when you mess with their money. And so it's just like a conversation like that, like when you're confronting something like racism, right? It really is calling into question this person's character. Like you're saying one thing, but you're acting another way. And so it's just like for them, they want to put walls up. Yes, like all of natural inclination, we do it. We all do it. Like if you ever engaged in a conversation where someone says something to you and you're like, oh my gosh. And you start like, but it wasn't really like that. It was defense. That's just what we do. And so if you paint the picture for them where they recognize what they feel, right? as something that someone else is feeling, they can identify. So when we can identify with something, like it's much easier for us to address it because it's like common ground. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's like even if you're engaged in conversation with someone and this is what they're saying, I would just simply be like, okay, like how did you feel? I'm glad you felt that way. Now imagine for someone to live the entirety of their life every single day and that be their reality. It's like you couldn't bear it for 2 minutes, you know, but like I wake up and I go to sleep this way. You get what I'm saying? So I would just look at it from that lens. But yeah.
So as a white male from Mississippi, I grew up, personally I grew up and I was a multicultural guy, I was friends with everybody, just that kind of guy. But I had multiple friends who were very racist, and I had multiple family members who were even more racist, the older generation. And so I'm not, even though I had a different perspective than family members, I'm not going to assume that I didn't inherit certain mindsets that have stuck with me. And you know, even though I don't identify with that, I know that I grew up in that culture, so there's things that just marinate in you. Right, and so I would love your wisdom on how do you like ask the Lord to give you that perspective, or is it just, does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think in a way you're doing it now. So, and you live that way. Yeah. You're a curious person, and you're always like, you're open. And so even in the way that Scripture encourages us to search ourselves. I mean, for you just to pose the question shows that like that's something that you're doing, you know, and it may not be something that you're consciously doing every day. Maybe you should, maybe you want to. What I would add to that is being intentional about remembering that your history and your stories, and the moments that triggered a certain conversation or response in the family, you know, or like in the environment. Because I feel like those are very telling. Because, like you said, you marinate in those like environments, in those situations for years. And so I think if we're intentionally like, as we're talking about story, as we're talking about history, if we're intentionally remembering those moments and those times where we clearly saw racism playing out in our surroundings, in our lives, in our family, in our friends. I think if we're intentionally like remembering those and not isolating and trying to like forget them and like get away from like, oh, like you said, like you disassociated with it, you know? Yeah. And there's an element of that, of course, that is good, but I think there's a part of it, it's like, that's actually part of your story, and that is your history. Yeah. And there's a part of you that needs to remember in order to like know how to properly address it. So that's the one thing I would say.
I have a lot of hurt. Like me personally, I have a lot of hurt and pain and anger because of different things I've experienced. So when that comes up, I can either choose to defend myself, or I can just say like, okay, God, you're bringing this up and I'm going to lay it at your feet. Like a lot of you can't do the Holy Spirit's job a lot of times, but you can just lay yourself on the operating table. Yes. And I think by asking that question, you are laying yourself on the operating table, but don't be surprised if you don't see anything right now, and like 5 years from now, something comes up and you're like, no, that definitely doesn't need any work, you know? Yeah. And like the Lord's like, no, actually, like, I've been waiting since you asked that question, you know, in that garage to bring this up in your heart, you know?
I love
and
that.
if you, listen, when, like, if we are racist and we find racist things about ourselves, you're not going to be burnt at the stake, okay? Like, that was already happening, that was messed up, you don't want to do it again, right? So, yes, that might come up, and we need to say, like, hey, that's messed up, I'm misogynistic, I'm racist, like, I'm being sexist, you know, and somebody can point it out to you, and it's okay, we can go to the Father and say, hey, this is in my heart, and it's ugly, I'm ashamed, I'm angry, I don't want to admit it, but like, I'll hand it to you.
So good.
But it's not always going to be popular, okay? Like right now it's popular. Right now it's popular to have these conversations. In 5 years from now, I don't know how popular it'll be, right? And will you continue to let the Holy Spirit have these conversations with you when it's not everybody's main interest? You know?
Like, I want to love. I want that what you said about love overcomes like a multitude of sins. I want to know how to ask questions that make people feel loved who've experienced racism in their entire life. And I don't know how to ask those questions. I'm just being super real because I've never had these conversations before, but I want to. So I just need to know, even from you ladies or John or whoever's experienced that racism, like what are the most loving questions you've received where you felt so safe and I want to ask them?
I think someone said this earlier, and I don't remember who it was, but to answer that question, a component of it is going to come out of relationship. The question you ask me, you can ask Tyesha, and you won't get the same response. And so I think that's to say there is no secret formula of questions that we can give anyone, and they would be like the perfect questions to set the perfect mood, to get the perfect like it just doesn't exist. But it's like, I think Christian mentioned it when he was talking about Jesus asking questions to the woman at the well. They dealt with the issue behind what she was asking. And so it's like when you get to know someone, right, then you can ask the questions. Like if we're in conversation and I mention something, you can say, that's interesting, I've actually never thought of that. Can you explain that to me? And it opens the door. So it goes right back to listening, and it goes right back to a relationship, because you could walk up to a black person and be like, can you tell me about an experience of racism you had? To the common individual in America, you probably would not get the nicest words returned to you. To people in this community, you might get a few weird looks, but I would say the safest way to do that and the most loving way to do it is within the context of relationship. Because it may come across as like ill motive if you're just asking, tell me about like something racial that, like, why do you want to know? Like, you don't even know me. But I would highly like suggest doing it within the context of relationship, and just getting to know the person more than anything else. And then I would also like top it off by saying you can't fast track it either. When you grow to love someone, like anyone that's in a relationship with someone, whether it's a romantic relationship or not, it takes time for you to build to get to something. So it's not going to be our first coffee moment that we like boohoo cry and get somewhere together, but it's like really genuinely saying, I'm just interested in you as an individual and your experiences of racism, like those are a component of who you are, therefore I'm interested in those as well. And
yeah, just going off of that, I would say to your question that it's not a question, but it's a series of questions, and it's the intentionality of like, I been like doing this exercise recently where I have two people, or one person asks the other person just their name, like, and then your responsibility from there is like to just go on a journey and like, but first valuing the person's name, because so often we don't. Like that's the first thing we forget in the conversation, is the person's name. And so can you ask me my name, value that, and then ask me something else about myself. And so I think, it's just I think outside of like the question asking format and it being a question, it's the intentionality and it's the value of the person. The reason why you listen, the reason why you ask questions, the reason why you're patient and you're waiting and you're digging for a person's story is all rooted in value, And so it's not, so you have no idea what any of our stories are. Any person, you don't know anyone's story. And so you're just full of curiosity, and wonder. Because everyone is valuable and like has something to teach you outside of race and racism and like, and that's even going back to the end of the film where you say like, I'm committed to you, I'm not just carrying your pain. You don't want to know about my pain. You want to know about my potential and like, you want to know about like the things that inspire me and like you want to know my full story. You just want to get lost in the pain, That's not going to help you. That's not going to help me. And so I think the value is in the story itself, but not forgetting that the pain is a part of it.
That's good.
So good.
Because I don't want to be seen as like, oh, you poor case, like everybody's like not giving you an opportunity. Like, look, I'm very smart on my own. I'm very talented. I've done a ton of different things. I don't need you to relate to me on the level of like, I'm so sorry you're like suffering all the time, right? Like, I don't I'm not going to start a relationship with you if you see me as like somebody that you need to help out. You know, like I'm not interested in having that kind of. I mean, what relationship do you start with a person like, wow, you're so ugly. Can I help you? Like wow, you're really effed up. Like, can I, put you on the right path? No, I don't need that. I need you to actually do the work and see me for who I am, or see me for who the Father says I am. You know, and like, you need to, and that means you see my color, you see my culture, and you see why it's amazing. And not some like cheesy like, oh, you're amazing because you're colored. Like, go beyond. Like, I don't need any more of that. I need you to understand why my voice is not just interesting and culturally, pluralistic, but it's actually necessary. Like, why is my voice necessary in your community and your heart? Right? So instead of like walking up to somebody and be like, oh, well, let me help them out. Like,
that's good.
No, it's actually like let you help yourself out. You know?
That's right.
Help yourself out by like figuring out like, whoa, why is this entire people group being systematically repressed? Like, and why? So if you do the work on your own part, when you walk up to them, the question might be like, hey, what do you do? Like, what's your deal? Like, how do you like, what are you good at? Like, it'll just be a normal conversation. And then in that normal conversation, you will get it'll just be normal. And then you'll internalize, like, you'll understand the questions that are necessary. Like, let's say I have some kind of disease. I don't need you asking me like, oh, how's your foot? Like, if it's not hurting. But when it's hurting and I'm limping around and it's super inconvenient for you to like take me to the store, that's when you need to say like, oh, how's your foot? I see something's wrong.
Yeah.
Like, not when nothing's happening and I'm like having a great time. It'd just be like, I'm having a great time and you're like, wow, how's racism? Like, how's that affecting your life? Like, I don't want to talk about that right now. That's the last thing I want to talk about. It's like, how's that pimple on your butt right now? Like, no, I'm not going to talk about that. It has to be in the right context, and it has to be, you've developed a relationship to the point that you're bringing it. You asking that question is no longer about you. It's a question that the Holy Spirit is asking that person. And that's why you're asking it, not for the sake of like, oh, let's just figure out this racism problem. Because if we're just focused on figuring out the racism problem, we forgot that there's a sin problem.
Got him.
That's what really needs to get dealt with. And the sin that's in my heart is what's causing me to be racist, and it's what's causing this person to be destroyed and their identity to be erased. And so if you ask questions that lift that person's identity, then you may never talk about racism explicitly, but you will have combated it completely and holistically.
I love that.
Just one simple thought is I think all friendships happen organically, And so I think pretty much what we're saying is like in our intentionality, KJ, what you're saying is like to desire to broaden our cultural experience is we ask the Lord first and foremost, God, I want to broaden that. And so then who am I supposed to be intentional with? And who am I supposed to be intentional with in an organic way? As opposed to being like, I didn't go up to John when I saw him in Boston 5 years ago. John, I see that you are African American. And with that, I have 7 questions. And sometimes like we can do that. I'm not saying you're doing that, but sometimes we're like, please answer. And but what I did was I just saw, I asked him a question. And through that, he really sparked what was happening through Boston, and a friendship happened, And so, and it's just been amazing what's been happening over the years and the years to come. I'm praying for his wife. She's coming in Jesus' name. For another time. We're asking questions. But here's what I would say. I feel like a takeaway for our community, I think it's really easy to listen to people outside or brand new people we meet, but sometimes it's harder to listen to each other in this room. And I feel like a good takeaway is one, being intentional with new people we meet in different cultures and races, and the second is I just feel like a way to really practice listening and intentionality with culture is being intentional with the people in this room. And I think through that it it makes it just like normal. You know, it's not Saul's armor. It just makes it our own, so that when we do interact with someone else, it flows so easy.
I love this verse because it comes in the context of a nation being confronted for the oppression of its time. And so God is confronting a people for the oppression of its time. And it gets to a point where they're saying, where do we go from here? And the question literally is, what does God require of me? And so it says, with what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves of a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has shown you, O man, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? But to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. To do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And I think to do justly, we've hit on it already, but to do right by people because of their value, because of their worth in the Father. To love mercy, like to love the mercy of God toward me that actually forgives the sin in my heart. Man, I love that mercy. And to choose mercy in every conversation that I go into.
That's good. Yeah.
I'm going to demonstrate mercy to people in every relationship and every conversation that I go into, and to walk humbly with the Lord. Lord, change my heart.
Yeah.
So I think that's the invitation for tonight.
Amen.